Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Education USA's India App Camp session. Today's topic is Understanding Undergraduate Financial Aid Applications, the CSS profile, the ISFAA, and the FAFSA. My name is Marine, and I work with the Education USA India team. And with me, I have a couple of colleagues who are also logged in. Shanti, Pranita, and Aliza will be helping us behind the scenes with the technical aspects. At this point, I'd like to just bring your attention to the housekeeping notes that are mentioned on the slide. We'd request participants to use headphones and mute their microphones. For those participants who are joining us via Zoom, you can post your questions in the chat box. And for those who are joining us via the Education USA India YouTube channel, you can post your questions in the comments box. We request participants to keep the questions relevant to the session. And throughout the session, we'll be posting some important resources links in the comments box for which you can copy paste and keep it for yourselves for the future. If you've been following our AppCamp session series, you would be aware that we started this right in August, and we are going on right till the beginning of October. We started on August 3rd, and as you can see on the slide, we covered a variety of topics and sessions. Today is actually the second last session. So in case you want to take a snapshot of the slide, you can do so as well. Before we dive into the main part of the presentation, I'd just like to give a quick overview on Education USA for those who are not aware about the organization and the program. So Education USA is the official source on US higher education. And the reason why we are the official source is because we are a program that is supported and funded by the US Department of State. Our mandate is to provide accurate, comprehensive, and current information. We have a very wide network of over 430 centers in over 170 countries. And in India, we have 8 centers in 7 cities, which is managed by 4 hosts. So we have centers in Ahmedabad, Bangalore, Chennai. We have 2 centers in Hyderabad, and we've also got centers in Kolkata, Mumbai, and New Delhi. At Education USA, we have these 5 steps towards the applications process. For those who've attended our orientation sessions, you might already be aware of them. So step 1 is researching your options and shortlisting your universities. Step 2 is financing your studies and identifying the sources of funding. Step 3 is completing your application. Step 4 is applying for your student visa. And step 5 is preparing for your departure. The session today, applying for your financial aid comes in step 3 when you're completing your application, but you would have done this research in step 1 and step 2 as well to find out about the financial aid. There are a number of ways in which you can connect with the Education USA team in India. And at this point, I'd also request my colleagues to share the resources in the chat box as well as the comments section. So we are available on almost all the social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can follow our handle. It's Education USA India. We've got a sign up sheet as well, wherein you can sign up and receive all the latest information and notifications about our events, as well as scholarships and financial aid. We do have an all India calendar. And in this calendar, you'll be able to find out what are the latest and upcoming events happening in your city, as well as the virtual events that we keep hosting. We have a national toll-free line number as well. You are free to call us and speak to an advisor. We also have virtual Ask an Advisor sessions every day, which is hosted by an advisor, and we have the links available in the calendar itself. We host a number of sessions with US universities, and again, to get more details about that, you can check our calendar. We also have the individual advising memberships, and these are the services that you can get if you sign up with us. You will have an advisor that is assigned to you and that can help you in your applications towards a US degree program. We have an app that is available. You can download it either in your Android as well as your Apple devices. And our Education USA India YouTube channel is a very rich repository for all the recordings that we have done, all the webinars that we've hosted. You can always type in the subject matter. So for example, if you want to know how to write an SOP or how to prepare for an interview, you can type it in the search box there, and you can get all these videos. Today's recording will also be available in the Education USA India YouTube channel, as well as the previous sessions that we've hosted as part of the App Camp session. These are the contact details for all our centers. You are welcome to get in touch with the nearest center that is located. You can take a snapshot of this and you can contact us via email, you can call us, or find out the address of each center. And now we'll move on to the main part of the presentation. So before I introduce all the speakers and the panel members, I'll just request them to switch on their camera so that the audience can see you as well. Okay, I think yes, all right. So I'd like to give a very warm welcome to all our three speakers. Our first speaker is Pranati Gupte. She is the Regional Representative, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Middle East from the University of Kansas. Welcome, Pranati, and thank you for joining us. Our second speaker is Kevin Brown. Kevin is the Associate Director of Student Financial Services Counseling from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Thank you, Kevin, and welcome. And our third speaker is Peter Lundby. Peter is the Director of International Admissions at Temple University. Warm welcome to you as well, Peter, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this time, and I'm going to request Pranati to share her screen. And just for the information of the audience, so each speaker will be covering certain sections of the entire session. So for example, Pranati is covering, she's going to give an overview of financial aid. Kevin is going to talk about FAFSA, and Peter is going to talk about ISFAA and CSS. However, questions can be diverted to all universities about all the sections because they are experts at the whole session itself. All right, Pranati, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Marine, for introducing all of us. Hi, everyone. I am Pranati Gupte. I'm the regional representative, as Marine introduced. Before we dive into the detailed topic of understanding what is a CSS profile, how the application looks like, the International Student Financial Aid application, it's very important from a university standpoint and from a student standpoint to understand the differences between the scholarships that universities award and at the same time how you can apply for a financial aid. So I will try and give few examples here to help you understand in a better way of how you can apply some few tips and tricks at the end of my presentation, and then we can hand it over to our next presenters to talk in detail about what the profiles would look like. So before you plan to apply to any of the US university or any of your colleges that you aspire or dream to be at, the first important thing is to make a budget for yourself, especially if you have a family who is planning to pay for your expenses. You would definitely want to work around with them and make sure that you're on the same page as they are. It's very important that you distribute or understand what the distribution of money would be like. So a lot of times students ask questions like, ma'am, what is the cost of attendance, or what would be the estimated cost of the course that I'm applying to? So it varies from university to university. So you need to understand what the tuition, the financial cost is going to be like to study at that university. And at the same time, what is the living expense of that particular state or the university that you are going to apply to? You could be a graduate or an undergraduate student to understand this aspect. But when we look at the budget point, we have to look at certain potential categories. For example, if you're looking at financial aid, then what scholarships, what grants you could get, works and study opportunities, student loans for international students, and there are certain savings and contributions from your parents that we would look at. At the same time, we also get questions from students as to if we are an undergraduate student, can we work part-time? Yes, definitely. These are some of the points that I'll try and cover during my presentation. You will also want to list all of your potential categories and amounts of expenses, because you may have to track down for how much do I spend in a week, in a month, or even more. So recording everything that you can spend is a great way that you can determine areas to cut out on more expenses that you would have. Let us understand now what all expenses would you have to bear when you are in the US. So you have your tuition, you have your rent or your housing, you pay for your meals, health insurance, you have your books and technology fee that you pay for. There's transportation, communication, anything that you would pay for your personal items or anything that you buy for yourself. There could be family expenses and other recreational and travel expenses as well. So when you plan your budget, these are certain points that you need to take into consideration of if you are applying for a financial aid, what does the financial aid cover in total for you? So it's very unpredictable. You could just have a car breakdown when you are in the US and you are not definitely planning for it. But these are certain emergencies that you also would have to take into consideration when you plan your entire cost that you would spend. There could be bigger expenses. You could just go on a spring trip with your friends and you could be around there in the US, going to different places, exploring, and you've definitely not planned for it. So these are certain aspects that you would consider when you're planning your budget. And finally, when you plan something for yourself, you need to see what do you earn or what are your contributions, and at the same time, what are your expenses? Do you have a balance in those? So let us see what we can do here. When you arrive at a school in the US, that is not when you plan what would you spend. So it's very important that you look at the estimated costs. Now, when you apply to a university, you receive an I-20, which is an accurate source to know what you would pay for. So international students are expected to have all the funds covered that are shown on the I-20. That is a year's cost. And you can keep a plan for the coming 2 years or 3 years or even for 4 years. Also, as a graduate student, just to give you a tip here, it is very important to know what kind of assistantship or research assistantship that you have been awarded with, so that you can plan what your pocket money could be like. You won't get everything that you need, but maybe just receiving a scholarship or a fellowship would determine ahead of time what proportion is taxable for you, and at the same time, what are necessary to consider as taxes in your budget. Now, when you plan and be in the US, you look for different opportunities, and at the same time, you look at public and private institutions. So the tuition rates vary tremendously from school to school. Now, public schools, they may also be called as the state colleges or universities, are generally, but not always, less expensive than private institutions. Some private schools, however, may be able to offer scholarships to international students, and that state schools cannot. So a two-year community college are typically less expensive than colleges and universities offering bachelor's and graduate degrees. You can also make a comparison between urban versus some of the rural environments, how you can plan to spend. So you can look at the cost of living in different parts. In the US, they also vary tremendously. So like if you're living close to a big city, it is going to be definitely more expensive than living in smaller towns or rural areas. So renting an apartment, the cost would be twice, maybe as much as it would be in a smaller town, because there is such a high demand for housing in large US cities. Likewise, if you are considering food and transportation, then these living expenses may also be more expensive in a city. So let us see what are the sources of fundings that we have. Now, most commonly, or the most aware that we know, are the merit-based fundings. These are nothing but merit-based scholarships. Now, there are various types to these scholarships. So I have quickly highlighted here some that as a student, when you are researching and applying to universities, what you can look at. So we have the automatic versus the competitive scholarship. Now, automatic scholarships are purely awarded on merit. very limited or very firm eligibility criteria have been set by the university. So you don't really have to look back for more documents. It's just your high school GPA, the SATs and ACTs that the universities would look at. And if you meet the eligibility criteria, you're awarded with the scholarship. But at the same time, to award you with a competitive scholarship, there could be certain requirements of application and materials like an essay or letters of recommendation that go along. And then there's a committee that reviews your whole application before they award you a scholarship. So when you look at these kind of fundings, try to understand if the university that you're applying to, if they're offering a funding on merit, a scholarship rather on merit, is it automatic or is it competitive? You could also look at if the scholarships or fundings are renewable or they are one time. Now, it's very simple to understand by its term that one time scholarships are only awarded once and only in the first year of your study. So when you apply at the point of admission is when you receive the scholarship. Whereas there are renewable scholarships, which a lot of students look for. They are usually up to 2 years or 4 years, and they can be renewed, but they are renewed only if you meet with a certain criteria to renew the scholarship. So there's a minimum GPA. It could range from 3.0 out of 4, and there could be a minimum number of credits per year that you need to earn before you get the scholarship renewed. Here, I would also like to highlight one of the examples, which is from University of Kansas, and we have a KU International Excellence Award. Now, when you apply to a university after your admission, there is a competitive scholarship that we offer, and there is an application material where we review your profile on a holistic basis. So there's an online application. We look at your high school GPA, English proficiency, an essay. We look at your CV, co-curricular activities in the essay, and letters of recommendation. So when you apply for a competitive scholarship, a committee would review all of these documents before they award it to you. So you as a student can look out for options and apply to as many scholarships as you can if you can do that, because anything that you would get would certainly help you to plan for your finances in a better way. Then comes the main part when we talk about the source of funding, when it comes from the need-based or rather the part where we can secure our finances by loans, student and employment opportunities that we have on campus, and then the grants. Now, whenever we talk about these need-based fundings, the first thing that we look at is it need blind or is it need aware? Now, to give you a detail about what need blind is. So whenever an admission policy is set, and if it has a need blind policy, it does not really look or consider at the financial ability of the family when they're awarding the funds to this particular student. But if it's need aware, then in that case, there is an admission policy that is set where they consider the financial ability when they typically award these fundings. When we have our next presenters talk about it, I'm sure they would cover these details, more of these in the CSS profile and the FAFSA. Now, talking about loans, international students are eligible for private international loans to study in the US. You would certainly need to meet certain eligibility requirements like attending an approved school and having a co-signer in most cases. And then there are student employment opportunities. Students should always remember that you cannot count on working in the US unless you have been granted a teaching or research assistantship. Also, as an F1 visa applicant, you would be limited to working only for 20 hours or fewer in a week. So there should be jobs available for you on campus, and typically they won't pay you much, but certainly not enough to finance a university education. So do not count on this kind of a job for anything more than a supplement to other funds that you would really need. Now, then we have is grants, and these grants are free money, and at times they do consider academics, but grants are typically accessed or given to students based on finances, and students may have to reapply to them, and you would have to check for if they are renewable at any point. Are they awarded only at the time of admission, after the admission, or also for the coming 2 to 3 years of your education in the US? Here are some tips and tricks when you apply for funding, and this is what students should definitely look at. Whenever we apply, there would be deadlines and timelines which you need to consider. When you apply to a university, so there is a CSS profile, there is FAFSA, and there's also the international aid that you can apply to. But at times, there are universities who have their own process of giving out funds or grants to its students. So you need to check on university's website. At KU, we have a website where we talk about our financial aid, and similarly, other universities would also have the same. There are financial aid counselors that you can reach out to, talk to them, and ask questions about how you can apply. Also, when you're applying, I did mention and talk about budgets, but it's very important for you to calculate what your net price is going to be like. So you have your total annual costs, and then you minus all the grants and scholarships, and then you know what your net price is. So there would be at some point you would have to contribute something from your family. It's not that you would get the whole amount, including the tuition and the living expense paid by an organization or your university. Now, for applying to all of these funds, you need to know how to fill the aid forms. You need to know what additional material you require to submit. So please understand the deadlines and timelines for this, and be prepared before you apply. You cannot apply when the timeline period starts. Typically, it would start when you are applying for the university, your admission to the major that you're looking at. Also, when you apply, please determine what would be the taxable and non-taxable incomes. The university would take into account what assets you have, if there are other siblings studying in the US, and based on that, the fundings would be awarded to you. Lastly, you need to understand the institutional student analysis worksheets or forms that are available on the university's website. You can apply to as many scholarships as you can, because there could be a possibility that you won't receive fundings or you won't receive your grants, and then you at least have some or the other scholarship. Do your research before you apply. Try to submit as early as possible. Don't wait until the last day of applying to the financial aid. It's very important that you limit to certain requirements or materials that you mentioned. So I did mention about the essays, but there could be certain supporting documents that you need to provide. So please limit the words that you use. Proofread, make sure that you're providing the right and authentic information to the financial team or the committee that is reviewing it. And do satisfy all the requirements. Don't leave your application incomplete at any point. And lastly, don't get discouraged. It's okay if you don't receive a grant. It's always, there's always a next chance. So maybe you can apply in the next year, receive a grant, or look for more scholarships. And in the current world, we know that we always have to be aware of the scams that go around. Whenever you apply for scholarships, please note that there are various search tools. Also, Education USA has a lot of tools on their website where you can look for information of scholarship and funds. These are genuine and reliable sources that you can look at. Even if you see a third-party link, think before you click on that link, because they may not be reputable, they not be authentic. So please make sure that you don't get engaged into any kind of scams, because you never pay to receive a scholarship. That's the first thing that I would like to tell students. So if there's an organization who asks you that send some funds and we could give you a full scholarship, there's a guaranteed grant that we could give you. So it's most likely a scam in that case. And if you see a scholarship advertise that says there's free money, definitely you be cautious about that. And if you receive a notification that says you've been selected for a scholarship for which you did not really apply to, so any scholarship or grant will only come to you if you apply for it. And if you just receive an email, make sure that you're not clicking on it, communicating further. It's probably just a scam. So I'm leaving here some of my details and the university's website. So if there are any questions, we are here to answer. I'll hand it over to the next presenter. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pranati. Thanks for those tips and tricks as well. I'm sure students will have a lot of questions towards the end. I'll request Kevin to now share his presentation. Kevin will be covering the section about FAFSA. Great. Yes, we can see the presentation, Kevin.
Great. Thank you very much. Again, I'm Kevin Brown. I'm the Associate Director of Student Financial Services at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Thank you for joining us. We're going to be presenting today information regarding if students are eligible to submit a FAFSA. So what is the FAFSA? The FAFSA is the free application that students need to submit each year to be eligible for U.S. federal financial aid. To apply for federal aid, such as federal grants, work study, federal loans, students will need to complete the FAFSA, which stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. In addition, many U.S. colleges use the FAFSA information to determine your eligibility for need-based financial aid at their college universities for U.S. citizens and also if you're an eligible non-citizen as well. So who can submit the FAFSA? Students must submit a FAFSA each academic year in which financial aid is being sought. You have to be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen in order to submit the FAFSA. And eligible dependent students, in accordance with the U.S. Department of Education, must also include their parents' information on their FAFSA as well. Information is included on the application itself. So when can the FAFSA be submitted? The FAFSA becomes available to complete each October 1st. So it's actually coming up for next year in the next few days. It's available online at studentaid.gov. You must submit the FAFSA by the stated deadlines of your colleges and universities. Every college and university might have separate deadlines to submit the FAFSA. Please be aware of those particular deadlines. In order to complete a FAFSA, and if the student is a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen, the student needs to first secure something known as an FSA ID. The FSA ID is basically your username and password in order to access the U.S. Department of Education's forms and applications such as the FAFSA. Again, students, you must secure an FSA ID. Again, it is your username and password. Parents of dependent students must also secure your very own FSA ID and password. Remember that the FSA ID is unique and with the student, and at least one of the parents should have one as well. Don't mix them up. Just like any other password for any online site, they are very distinct to the student and to the parent. So when you will be using these passwords and use your FSA ID again in the future, so please make sure you retain those. And make sure you write them in a secure place. For an example, I usually will write down my passwords and take a photograph with my phone because I know I have my phone with me at all times. And this way I know where my FSA ID password and username is. If you need to create an FSA ID password, you can do that also at the same website at studentaid.gov. How should I report information about my non-citizen parents on a FAFSA? Again, the FAFSA needs to be submitted by a U.S. citizen, but in some cases we have students who are U.S. citizens, but they're a dependent according to the U.S. Department of Education. In those cases, they do need to include their parents' information on that FAFSA as well. If your parent doesn't have a social security number, much as a student, he or she won't be able to create an FSA ID, which requires a social security number, and therefore won't be able to sign your FAFSA electronically online. And so what they'll need to do is actually print out a signature page from the application. You'll need to then select the option to print the signature page when you get to the end of the application, print that page, and then have your parents sign it. And then they'll mail it to a specific address that's listed on the FAFSA, so the FAFSA can actually be processed. And again, this is because the parent will not be able to actually have an FSA ID because they're not a U.S. citizen. Again, all the instructions are included on the FAFSA. If a parent doesn't have a Social Security number, you should enter all zeros for him or her on the free application, on the FAFSA itself, when it asks for the Social Security numbers. Do not enter the taxpayer's identification number in the SSN field, the Social Security number fields. Again, only enter zeros. Again, the instructions on the FAFSA also provide directions regarding this. If your parent doesn't live in the U.S., select foreign country from the drop-down box on the questions on the parent side of the FAFSA. If your parents live and file tax in that foreign country and don't file U.S. taxes, you'll have the opportunity to include that on the information on the FAFSA. Then, when the FAFSA asks them whether your parents have filed the foreign tax returns, they should include yes, indicate yes on the application. When you include information regarding the parent's income on your FAFSA or the student's income on the FAFSA, the amounts, you should convert the amounts to on the foreign tax return to U.S. dollars as directed on the FAFSA. What happens next? After you submit the FAFSA to the U.S. Department of Education, it'll be shared with the colleges that you have listed on the application. Schools use this information to figure out how much aid you'll be receiving at those individual schools. Other schools might also require additional forms for you to fill out. Here at SCIC, the only form we ask students to fill out is the FAFSA, if they're eligible to do so. Once you have gone ahead and submitted your FAFSA, you want to check to make sure your FAFSA form has been processed successfully. Students can check the status of the FAFSA form immediately by submitting it by going to studentaid.gov and checking the status of the FAFSA they have submitted. Students, you will also receive a very important email from the U.S. Department of Education within 3 days after the FAFSA is submitted. Please make sure that you read that email and share it with your parents when necessary. This will contain something known as your student aid report, which is basically the results of your FAFSA that you've just previously submitted. In some cases, if a student submits a FAFSA, there is a chance you could be chosen for something called federal verification by the U.S. Department of Education. Verification is a process where the school uses to confirm that the data reported on your FAFSA is accurate. If you're selected for verification, the school will require some additional documentation that supports the information that you provided on the FAFSA. Don't assume you've done anything wrong. Some students are chosen at a very random indication. Some schools will actually choose all students for verification. Every school is a little different, but again, if the school or college is asking for any additional documentation from you, please make sure that you respond to them specifically as soon as possible. And if you're chosen for federal verification, again, just please respond as soon as possible to that college or university. If you have any questions about what they're asking, please make sure you reach out directly to that college or university and ask for clarification about what they need. So what is the result of the FAFSA? So when you receive your student aid report about 3 days after you submit your FAFSA, again by email, it will contain a very important number. If the application is complete, you will receive something called as an estimated family contribution, also known as an EFC. This will display in the upper right-hand corner of your student aid report. If your application is incomplete, your student aid report will not include an EFC, but will tell you what you need to do to resolve that issue. Again, students, please make sure you read that student aid report that's emailed to you about 3 days after you submit your FAFSA. Schools will be using this EFC to determine your federal student aid eligibility and awarding your financial aid for the upcoming year. I want to clarify that the EFC is not the amount of money that you or your family will pay to go to college, nor is it the total amount of financial aid you'll be receiving. It is a number that's used by the colleges and universities to calculate the amount of federal aid you could be eligible to receive for that academic year. Once we receive your student aid report, colleges and universities will produce a financial aid award for you. The financial aid award offer will have several different items on that award. Again, we'll be using that EFC that's calculated by your student aid report that's generated by the FAFSA that you submitted. And your financial aid award could contain several different items. One, it could contain free money. These include scholarships and grants that the student is eligible for. It also includes the eligibility for federal student loans from the U.S. Department of Education. As a reminder, these loans are not free money and they do need to be repaid back. These can include the federal direct Stafford loan programs. These are loans specifically in the student's name, which are offered to the student by the U.S. Department of Education if you fill out a FAFSA and meet the qualifications. I want to remind you that parents can also apply for additional loans. In many cases, these are credit-based loans. So again, you do need to be approved for those loans. In many cases, students and families will sometimes have to consider private loans as a way to bridge the gap between the cost of attendance at a college university and the other grants and scholarships those students might be eligible for. Again, those private loans do require an application, and they do also have interest, and again, those do need to be repaid back. That is not free money. That's the conclusion of my presentation. I'd like to hand it back over to the board. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kevin. We do have a number of American citizens, students who are based in India. So I'm sure that the students as well as their parents will have queries about FAFSA. I'd like to now request Peter to screen share. Peter will be covering about the CSS profile as well as the ISFAA.
Just want to confirm you're seeing the slide, not the presentation deck, right?
We can currently see the presentation presenter mode. So we can see the right side of the notes as well. Yeah.
Should be there now. Is that correct?
Okay, now that's perfect. Yes, thank you.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much. And first of all, just to say my name is Peter Lundberg. I serve as Director of International Admission at Temple University. Like Pranati, I'm a former international student myself, so it is great to talk to you and share some of the experience that I have had over the many years that I've had experience with this. I will also just make a little disclaimer. I am going to cover a little bit over some of the things that you have heard, but I hope that I can just help to enforce some of the things that you have heard. So we're going to continue talking about financial aid issues, topics. We're going to learn, you already learned about FAFSA. We're going to talk about the CSS financial profile now, and we're going to learn about the ISFAA. And then, of course, you're going to have plenty of times for questions after this particular point. So I'm just going to make a statement here. I had actually wanted you all to answer this question, but I think that given the time that we have, this will probably take a while. But what is the difference between financial aid and scholarships? So in general, when we're talking about financial aid, it refers to aid and most often the federal aid. So this is the part that Kevin just covered, and it is award based on need, whereas scholarships are awards based on merit or certain accomplishments. However, in institutions in the US, because we are so many institutions, these terms are very often used intertwined. So some universities might show the scholarships in general on their financial aid website, and some institutions might have specific pages for scholarships specifically for international students. So it is important for you to actually make a deep dive into that. When you are looking for financial aid or financial support, that you understand if you are looking for the aid that is provided for domestic students or US citizens, and the ones for international students, or if they are indeed the same. The federal aid that we just talked about before, as you know, requires you to be either a US citizen or a qualified resident alien. Okay, so for example, at Temple University, where I work, we have schools and colleges scholarship that are listed on the financial aid pages because it is administered by our financial service offices. But these are not institutional, they are not federal, they are actually departmental. So you would be able to apply for those even though they are on the financial aid website. So try my best not to make this complicated, but just trying to make you aware that there might be multiple places where you would need to look for the scholarships that you qualify for. So that really leads us to the next statement. In the US, institutions offers hundreds of millions of dollars in financial support every single year. And the key question or the key note that I would bring to you today, that is, how do you qualify, or do you qualify? So this is the important search that you should look into once you have found the institution that you are interested in joining. Financial literacy a little bit, I have sort of broken it down into 5 different categories. That might be a little one extra if you want to add some of the subcategory. But in general, the merit-based scholarships is something that is usually assessed by the admission office. So when you send in an application, there might be a form that you need to submit with it, or it might just be the application form itself. Then the admission office will make an assessment based on your grades, maybe on your activities, maybe your essay, maybe your test scores, and they will issue a financial merit state scholarship on your admission letter or shortly after. Some universities will have application forms that you can fill out. One of those could, for example, be the CSS profile or the ISFAA that we will talk about in a bit, where you actually have to fill out and actively submit an application in order to receive some form of financial support. Then there is select scholarships. I usually categorize those as a form where you have been prompted to do something. It could be, for example, that the university has a question that says, we would very much like to know how you think about studying in the US. Please provide a submission that shows in a creative way what it means to you to study in the US. And then there's going to be a selection committee that will go through all of the responses that we receive, and then the winners will be selected and notified. In the cases that I'm aware of, and from my past experience, those select scholarships might take place in the admission office, but very often might actually be outside of the admission review itself. So they're not part of the general application or admission review, and as such they are decentral from the general application process. They may also have a different deadline, so that is something where you would need to find on the website if the institution you're looking at has such types of scholarships. Then there's a talent type of scholarship. That is the type where if you have a talent either in sports or in performing or visual arts, you might get money, and there might be an application form for that as well. And then this is really, in most cases, they're grants and loans or government scholarships where you would need to apply for something like FAFSA. The ISFAA, in my terminology, is essentially a FAFSA for international students, i.e. The students who do not qualify under the federal grant scheme. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about these different categories that can lead to money. We will skip FAFSA in this part, of course, because you just heard about that. So let's start with the college scholarship services. So the CSS financial profile, that is a profile that allows you to disclose your financial situation, primarily a statement for need-based financial support. The CSS, which has been created by College Board, that's the same institution that runs the SAT test, is used around 400 colleges and universities in the US. Most of those are private, and most of them have a system that is called need aware. And you just heard about the terminology before between need aware and need blind. So when an institution is need aware, that means that you can usually apply for a scholarship or for a financial support by submitting your financial needs. sorry, and very often, as you say, that form could be a CSS profile. The important thing that you need to know is whether your college actually requires the CSS form when you are applying. They could have their own form, but they could also be requiring the CSS form. So in addition, so this is a pre-made self-disclosure form. So it is an additional application. It does collect a lot of personal and family data. You heard Kevin mentioning a lot of things about the FAFSA. The data on the CSS is very, very similar. It just does not necessarily require information that pertains to US citizens. The CSS forms can be used both by domestic students, but also by international students. It takes quite a while to fill it out. I believe it's about 10 or 13 pages or so. So do start early if you plan to submit a CSS form. It is important that you are aware that College Board, while it is nonprofit, it is an organization, so there is a charge to create their form. The profile is $25. That allows you one submission, but if you need to submit additional forms, that is $16 for each of those. It is also important that you understand that by filling the CSS, that does in no way guarantee that you will actually receive the need that you have. So therefore, it is very important in my mind to understand if the institution you are applying for requires you to submit a CSS. If they do not require a CSS, then my recommendation is don't waste your money on creating the CSS form just to submit one in the hope that the institution might accept it or not. So make sure you read the guidelines on the admission and the scholarship pages if they require you to submit a CSS form. I'm going to switch to the International Student Financial Aid Application, or the ISF. This essentially is an independent document. It is not necessarily a universal form. The application allows you to do the same as the CSS. It allows you to disclose your financial situations. As I mentioned here on this page, the ISFAA can essentially be the CSS profile, but it can also be an institution's own application form for international student financial aid or application. The primary difference is that institutions that are using the terminology ISFAA is that is a unique application form for international students to use. So again, when you read through the admission requirements on a school's website, make sure that if they mention in the format of scholarships that they want you to fill out an ISFAA, that you submit what they ask for. They may have their own form, or they may ask you to submit a copy of the CSS. So again, just follow the instructions that is on the website. So the ISFAA form is not affiliated like the CSS. It is a pre-made self-disclosure form where you put information that is requested that usually includes the income of your family, your properties, etc. It will have lots of personal information, but be alert that you are looking at a form from the institution itself and not a scam form like Pranati mentioned. Do not download forms from some website that you are not familiar with, or that is not specifically the university. Universities will never ask you for bank account numbers, for example, or login informations, etc. It is okay, though, that they ask for income information and a property. It may or may not contain academic information from you in terms of selection use. It just depends on what the form is used for by different universities. So again, make sure that it is official and submit the details that are required. Again, There is no guarantee that just because you fill out an ISFAA form, that you will be granted need-based awards. So I hope that comes through. And again, be aware, you can try to Google this, but be aware that there is no single centralized ISFAA form. So if you Google that, you will simply find a bunch of different links to institutions. Some of them are private and some of them are corporate. So be aware of the search result if you look into actually Googling ISFAA. Okay, so we're not going to talk about FAFSA because we just did that before, but in a quick review, the CSS is a few colleges that uses that. It does have a cost, so do understand if it's required. For the ISFAA, it is pretty general, but again, check and see if it's required. If a form is not required, there is no need to submit one. There is no need for you to submit the CSS form if the university does not offer need-based review and do not ask for it. And FAFSA, again, as Kevin mentioned, do you qualify for FAFSA in terms of that? So you have those three different terminologies there. Like Pranati also said, this takes a lot of research to go through this, but it is obviously worth it because, as I mentioned in my first slide, there are a lot of money out there to be had. So do find the college that you are interested in, understand their financial support for international students, understand that some universities, especially large universities, may have multiple levels of financial support. And by that, I mean they might have both in the admission, they may have in the colleges, and they may also have a very specific award system for a unique type of students. Research the deadlines and the requirements. Sometimes the deadlines for the additional applications are different from the admission applications. Understand your need versus available support. So for example, if you're looking at a website and they do not offer full ride scholarship and your need is very close to full ride, then be aware that it might not be worth your time to apply for the university if there is a very big gap between your need and what the institution is able to support. Trust me, from my point of view, it is not that we do not want to support you. It is not that we would not want to give you a big, strong scholarship, but very often, many of us, especially in public universities, do not have high need scholarships available. I put a little fun quote in here: early bird gets the worm, so start your application early. As you just heard from FAFSA, deadline is October 1st. Very often the first deadline for admission to universities is here in October as well, or in November. Most universities are working on an annual budget. So when we see more applications, it is possible that the scholarship money in that budget depletes faster. So the sooner you apply for a university, the stronger a chance usually is that you will get a strong scholarship. So submit early. I put this slide in just to give Temple University's international financial support, and I put them in two categories. The red on the left is what we would call financial aid. Usually the FAFSA loans and waivers and grants are not eligible for international students at Temple. But at Temple, we do have the four other areas of scholarship, both merit scholarship, selective scholarship. We have our collegial colleges. So engineering, for example, have scholarship that they offer to international students. And we also have talent scholarship. I am going to end my part right here. I'm going to put my name and contact in the chat box, and I'm looking forward to answering questions that you may have in the Q&A session following now. Thank you very much. And
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Peter. We do have a lot of questions coming in. I'd request all the speakers to switch their cameras back on so that the audience can see. And I'm not going to share my screen at the moment because then the viewers from our YouTube channel won't be able to see you as well. So we do have a couple of questions which are related to the topics that you've already covered and some of the points that you've already covered, but just to reiterate for the students' benefit, I'll try and club some of the questions together. So the first question is, who is eligible to apply for FAFSA, and can an Indian citizen or an American citizen living in India apply for FAFSA? Kevin, would you want to take that question? Yes.
Sure. An eligible non-citizen could be living in India. This could be somebody who has dual citizenship. This could be somebody who has a green card if they're in the United States. But again, it is somebody who is considered to be an eligible non-citizen by the U.S. Department of Education. Again, it has to be, at least the student has to be a U.S. citizen. The parent doesn't need to be a U.S. citizen, but at least the student does.
Thank you. Pranati, Peter, would you want to add anything to what Kevin has mentioned already?
Great answer. I don't think I would add anything.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Don't,
We'll move on to the next question. So can you tell us what is a need-aware or need-blind institution, and how do they evaluate a student's application?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you don't mind, I'll take it. I think Pranati and I are both working for institutions that are need blind. I don't want to speak for Kansas, of course, but I see you nodding, so I think the answer is correct. That means that we usually do not look for need-based, and i.e. we do not look for students' financial. So when we issue merit-based scholarship or select-based scholarship, we do not ask for students' financial details, and you can be rich or poor. It is all about your contribution on your application or your submission for the selection that it's about. So in one way, this kind of creates an even platform for everybody. But on the other hand, it's also a little bit problematic when students, for example, have a high need, if they do not research our institutions, if they do not understand that even with the best scholarship that they're still responsible for $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 a year, then it's a bit sad for someone in my seat that we don't get these wonderful students just because we do not have the ability to fully finance them. The reverse side of that is the need aware. So the institutions that are need aware very often are private institutions, and they will actually ask for the financial information and take that into consideration. I'm just going to plug my power in. I apologize for that.
Sure, no problem. Pranati, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think Peter covered most of it. Just like the Temple University of Kansas is also purely need blind. We don't ask for financial documents at the time of application. We would just award the scholarships. Only if students are looking beyond a full tuition waiver, then we ask them to connect with our financial aid counselors, and they would guide them how to apply to receive any grants. At this point, we have a separate application, or rather a worksheet that students submit. We ask specific questions about the family's income. This comes on a later stage after the students are admitted to the university. So when you're applying, that doesn't count. You just apply with your high school GPA. That's it.
Okay, thanks. Kevin, do you want to add anything to that as well?
No, that was a great answer. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Can students apply for fee waivers for the CSS form? Anyone can take the question.
So the CSS administered by College Board, there is an ability to actually apply for fee waivers on that. I must admit, I am not entirely certain what they use as the determining factor to allow it or not. But there are clearly abilities to create a CSS and get that without necessarily creating a profile.
Thanks, Peter. Pranati, Kevin, anything else you would like to add? Okay. We'll move on to the next question. How does one link the FAFSA to the Common App? Do you need to fill the FAFSA first, or can you do it through the Common App portal?
Very good question. Students do not need to wait to be admitted to a college or university before you submit a FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. They're not connected whatsoever. Students can submit a FAFSA to any college or university. Well, they're going to submit to the U.S. Department of Education, typically the way students will. They'll indicate up to 10 schools that they would like to have the results sent to. Those schools will receive those results from the FAFSA. Schools will then provide financial aid based on that FAFSA after the student has been admitted to the college, university, and after we've received your FAFSA. So again, you do not have to be admitted to the school before you submit a FAFSA and indicate that you want them to receive the results. Again, but college universities do need to have their results after you've been admitted in order to provide you with a financial aid award. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Kevin. Peter, Pranati, anything else to add?
I wanted to add that I'm not certain, but if Peter and Kevin could add to this. So Common App, FAFSA, and even the CSS, they don't need to be linked. Students can just go in and submit their application to the respective agencies. So it's that way. Even for CSS, we don't need to link, or not for FAFSA. We would receive the applications later.
Okay,
I
thanks.
think I would just add, as Kevin mentioned, there is a hard deadline for FAFSA. So be in mind that hard deadline being October, Kevin, forgive me, October 1st or October 30th.
Sure. It actually becomes available October 1st. So it's the first time it becomes available. So it becomes available October 1st. Every college university usually has a separate deadline, but you do want to make sure you're paying attention to those college universities regarding what that specific deadline is. For example, here at SAIC, if a student is thinking about enrolling next year in 2023-24, our deadline is the first of the year, so January 1st of 2023. Again, you do want to make sure you're meeting the deadlines of every particular college university. But again, the FAFSA usually becomes available for the upcoming year on October 1st.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next question. Can any one of y'all explain how a net price calculator works and how accurate it is when you arrive at the net price? Any one of y'all can answer this question.
Yeah, so I think there are probably multiple formats of that. And I would say most institution probably has their own net calculator. What the net calculator allows you to do is that, for example, in Temple University, where we have multiple different prices depending on the college, so it's quite complex. When you put in, let's say you want to do engineering, and then you set in where you want to live on campus, that gives you the idea of that cost. The net calculator in this particular case really gives you a good understanding of what the cost of studying and living, what it does not do, and this is also something that the I-20 amount doesn't do. It does not take into consideration your personal additional cost. So for example, paying for a phone on a monthly basis, traveling to the US, traveling locally, doing, events, like if you're going to the movie theater once a month or something, all that type of cost, like Pranati mentioned, to be aware of that extra expenses. That is not mentioned in the net calculator. So you have to be aware of what your personal cost will be after the required fees are paid.
Thanks, Peter. Would Kevin or Pranati want to add anything to this?
Sure. I think Peter did a great job with explanation. Every school does have the net price calculator usually available on their website. It does give you a very good rough estimate of what your expenses will be at the college university. It doesn't include all of your expenses, and it's not as specific as if you're submitting your official financial aid forms, but it does give you a good idea of what your expenses or your investment would look like to attend the United States, a college in the United States.
Thanks, Kevin. I'll move on to the next question, and we're getting a lot of questions about FAFSA actually, so I will try and break it into several parts. So the first question is, only one parent has an SSN so can create the FSA ID and sign the FAFSA electronically. So does the other parent who does not have an SSN also need to sign off on the FAFSA? I think that's the question, yes.
Actually, there's only one parent needs to sign the FAFSA who's in the student's household. So if one parent does have Social Security number or an SSN, they should be the one who is filling out the parent section on the FAFSA. This way, they'll be able to submit the FAFSA with the parent's Social Security number that's been represented by the parent. So absolutely. Hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, I'll move on to the second part now. Again, I'm clubbing various questions into one. So when the students and the parents, they fill up the income information, how is it verified as income, which is accessed by the IRS?
So typically, if a student or a parent is filing U.S. income taxes, there is a tool that they can use called an IRS data retrieval tool. It's available. It's on the FAFSA to allow you to provide permission to the U.S. Department of Education to take the information from the Internal Revenue Service here in the United States that will scoop up the information from the IRS and then put it into the FAFSA. That's one way to make sure that you're filling out the FAFSA accurately, make sure you're making it an easier step for both the student and the parent, and it also provides the Department of Education with some verification that the information that's on the FAFSA is correct. If the student or the parent has not filed a U.S. tax return, and if they're filing a tax return in a foreign country, or if they haven't filed taxes, they need to include their income information from what was called prior year as required by the U.S. Department of Education. So they're asking for income from 2 years ago. It's a snapshot of what the income was for the family at that time. The instructions are very clear and concise on the FAFSA itself, but that's how they will make sure that the information is correct. If the school or if the Department of Education has any concerns about what's been listed on the FAFSA, there is a chance the student could be chosen, or the FAFSA application can be chosen for something called verification. This is where the colleges and universities will ask for some additional documentation from the student and the family to verify the information that's on the FAFSA. That could be including copies of tax returns from a foreign country or income documents from you. So that's how we will confirm the information is correct and accurate on the FAFSA.
Thanks, Kevin. And the last part of the question, do they have to convert the Indian income into USD rates on the
Yes,
FAFSA
they
form?
do. Yes, they do. If you're going to include income information on the FAFSA, you do have to convert it to US dollar. There is some instructions on the FAFSA. There's plenty of calculators that can be used on the on the internet where you can go ahead and do that conversion, but you should be doing conversions from Indian currency to US currencies.
Thanks, Kevin. Pranati, Peter, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, just I think a lot of students also come up with questions like when they provide with the financial statements or income statements, they're typically in the Indian currency. So it's always great to have the equivalent amount for USDs mentioned when they submit the document. So that helps the university to understand when they submit the application. So the equivalency amount is essential.
Thanks, Pranati. I'll move on to the next question, which is related to the CSS profile. So for parents who are separated or divorced, is it mandatory for both the parents to submit their financial profile? If one of them is not willing to share, yes.
It's kind of like the same as what Kevin mentioned with FAFSA. I believe that it is required that you put at least one parent information there, or certainly one resource, unless if parents or family member is deceased, then you need to put it on there. there is also a reasoning field, right? If you cannot put the information, you can put a reasoning in there, and that can obviously be taken into consideration. But the bottom line is that the more details that you can put on the CSS or any financial form, the more detail the universities will have in order to be able to assess your actual situation.
Thanks, Peter. Kevin or Pranati, anything else?
Yeah, students can, this is for some students who would like to add this information. There is a section in CSS where the non-custodial parent can also add in their information, and they can complete this application process by giving their own details. This is specifically for biological parents who are separated and divorced. So there is a non-custodial part that they can fill in.
Thanks,
I hope this
Pranati. I'll move on to the next question, which is regarding need-based aid. Is there a minimum amount to show as funds to be considered for the need-based aid?
I would think that sometimes, right, Kevin? I mean, maybe you deal more with that than we probably do. I mean, you could list that you have 100% need, but you might not get 100% need. I think that's the best answer, right?
Correct,
Kevin?
Peter. I think what we're looking for is on any of the financial documents, what we're looking for is your income and assets, basically showing us what you have at your disposal to help with your investment to come to the United States and study at a college or university. So that information, your need is going to be assessed by the information you're actually including on your financial aid applications, including your income and your assets. And so that's how we're going to make a determination of your need. For example, with the FAFSA, the way the FAFSA determines your need is the results of the FAFSA, called the Estimated Family Contribution, the EFC, which is the way we make the determination of what a student's need is if they are eligible to fill out a FAFSA.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks, Peter. I'll move on to the next question, if that's okay with all of you all. Okay. For all the financial aid forms that we've discussed, once the student submits it, is there a way to edit it later on after the deadlines have passed? If the situation changes, how would a student go about editing it? Is there a way at all?
Speaking about the FAFSA specifically, students and families should be trying to submit that FAFSA accurately the first time, because again, most of the information that's on the FAFSA, when they're asking for income information for the student and the family, specifically with the FAFSA here from the U.S. Department of Education, they're asking for what's called prior income. So again, that's from 2 years ago. You should know what your income was as of 2 years ago, so that should help you to make sure you're filling out successfully and accurately. There are some times where students and families do make some errors. You can make a correction to your FAFSA. The student can log back on to the U.S. Department of Education's website and resubmit a correction to your FAFSA. It does need to be digitally signed again by the student to indicate that they're setting a new FAFSA with a correction. Please be aware, though, that the more corrections you make on your FAFSA, sometimes the Department of Education and even the college universities will start to doubt the accuracy of the information. So the more changes you make, the more doubt that could be in people's minds. So please try to submit that FAFSA. If you're submitting one accurately the first time using accurate data, there are some very helpful tips throughout the FAFSA application. Next to every question, there's a little bullet that has a question mark next to it. If you're not sure about what they're actually asking in that question, if you click the little bullet, it'll actually open it up and provide you with some additional information that helps provide some clarity regarding that specific question. So hopefully that does help as well. But again, do try to submit that FAFSA as accurately as you possibly can. With the other forms, I'm not as familiar. I don't know if Peter can maybe speak a little bit more about that, or any of our other speakers.
I don't think I have anything to add to this. I think.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next question. How many times can a student apply for financial aid? Is there a limited number of times they can do that in a year?
Specifically with the FAFSA, you only want to submit the FAFSA one time. It's submitted each year before the student is thinking about enrolling. When it comes down to applying for, say, private scholarships, I always encourage students to constantly be looking for outside scholarships or from foundations or organizations. That is something that students should constantly be doing. Kind of like fishing. The more you cast, the more opportunities you have to catch fish. It's the same idea with looking for scholarships. Just try as much as you possibly can. The more you submit an application, hopefully your increased chances for securing outside scholarships. And again, outside scholarships are not provided by a college, university, or from the U.S. government. It's provided by private foundations or organizations based on their own application processes.
Thanks, Kevin. Peter, Pranati, would you like to add anything else? Okay, all right. We'll move on to the next question, which is about the CSS profile. This is a situation where the student's parents don't possess any assets. And that's the reason why they can't complete the CSS profile. Do you have any tips on how the student can do that?
I think I wrote it in the chat, and I apologize for the misspelling initially. If asset is 0, then you would have to list it as 0. It kind of goes to the question that Kevin answered before, is whatever information it is. You know, if you have 0 asset, that means you're 100% need, but it does not mean that an institution can grant you 100% fulfillment of that need, but you need to list what it is. If it's just a little bit, it's the same thing with the family income, right? If you have 2 parents and you don't have the information on one of them, you will need to disclose that you do not have information about the second parents, particularly in the question when there's divorce and maybe the child doesn't know about the second parent or has no affiliation. Then you would simply just lead that parent is not participating in the supporting financially. And if I may make a general statement, because some of the question on here, and Kevin knows better than me, I think, and Pranati might also, when we're talking about FAFSA, if you're qualifying for FAFSA, meaning that you are either a US citizen or you are a qualifying resident alien one way or another, which normally is permanent residence, then normally you are considered what we would call a domestic applicant. And that normally means that the application path that you take in our system will land you in our central office or in our domestic office, which means that you will submit forms that pertains to domestic students. So for example, FAFSA form, but if you are an international student, usually defined as, do you need a student visa to study in the US, then you would end up in the international office, where very often we would not use FAFSA forms. You would not fill a FAFSA form because you don't qualify for that category usually. But then you could submit an ISFAA form in the event that the university asks for it. So just the 2 distinctions. Usually, if you qualify for a FAFSA, you are probably not considered an international student in the admission terms, whereas if you do not qualify for FAFSA, you would probably be an international student.
Thanks, Peter.
Lots of terminologies.
Kevin, Pranati, would you like to add anything else?
I think Peter answered, and that's what even we do at our university. So when students apply, we look at applications. If they are US citizens based in India, we would pass on it to the domestic team, and they would consider that as a domestic application, and further they would be eligible to apply for a FAFSA. But yes, of course, international students, we would look at if they would be eligible to apply or not.
Okay. Thanks, Pranati. I'll move on to the next question, which is about FAFSA. If a US citizen student's parents does not own a home in the US but has some investment in the US, do they have to report that investment, and will this reduce the chance of getting financial aid?
Very good question. On the FAFSA, it's going to ask income information from the student and the parents if the student is dependent student. It's also going to ask about the assets that the household has. That would be assets in the student's name or assets in the parent's name as well. They'll be asking about income information and assets for the parents if they have any kind of investment net worth that they have. Those can include stocks, bonds, cash assets, property that is owned by the parents that is not their home that they actually live in, their own domicile. But if they have any kind of rental property or we call them vacation homes in the United States, anything like that, that has to be reported. So any savings that the parent has needs to be recorded. The only time that those savings do not need to be recorded is if they're specifically in a retirement account. So if it's in an IRA or some type of retirement account, those do not need to be listed on the FAFSA as an asset. But if there's something in an investment account that is a free investment account where money can be pulled in and pulled out, that can include a savings account, that can include stocks, bonds, things like that. Those do need to be included on the FAFSA.
Thanks, Kevin. Peter, Pranati? Okay, I'll move on to the next question, which is regarding CSS again. So after submitting the CSS, the students are prompted to submit support documents through iDoc. Could you please explain this process?
So when you fill out this CSS form, it is required just like FAFSA. Because CSS is not connected to the government like FAFSA is, you will need to submit the documents that are needed. So for example, it might be a monthly statements of your parents. It might be property assessment if that is part of the source that you have when you're listing properties. It could be income statement from stocks or bonds that, like Kevin just mentioned. I also agree. I don't believe that retirement funds are asked on the CSS form, but those assets, it will ask to document that. So if you say that a parent is making $20,000 a year or something like that, you will probably be asked to submit either an annual statement or a monthly statement to that event, so that the CSS can verify or the amount that you are listing. It's sort of like supporting document to your profile.
Thanks, Peter. Pranati, Kevin? Okay. We'll move on to the next question. Do parents need to get any third-party endorsement for the CSS financial data? The CSS form, basically. Do they need to get a third-party endorsement?
With endorsement, I'm assuming meaning submission. I don't believe so. I don't think... I think the question might be that with the documents that maybe it has to be notarized, yes, or it has to have an official source or something like that. That might be the case in some areas.
Thanks, Peter. Pranati, Kevin? Okay. I think we've covered the next question a bit, but the student has basically, the student's query is about his or her parent who both of them have the SSN. And is it required for both of them to submit their documents and their details, or if one is just required? And I think one is sufficient, right?
Regarding the FAFSA, I just want to provide some clarification. Parents should be included on the FAFSA if they're in the household. So if there are two parents in the household, they both need to be included on the FAFSA. If both of them have Social Security numbers, both of them should include that on the FAFSA. If one parent has Social Security number and the other one doesn't, then the parent who has the Social Security number should be the primary parent who's submitting the parent side of the FAFSA, sometimes known as parent one. Parent two, the parent who might not have a Social Security number will enter all zeros that I mentioned previously. But again, all parents and everyone in the student's household needs to be included on the FAFSA if they're a dependent student, according to the U.S. Department of Education. Hopefully that provides some clarification.
Thanks, Kevin. Peter, Pranati, would you like to add anything else? Okay, the next question isn't really related to what we covered today, but how many years of taxes should be paid to the US government to qualify for the in-state tuition fee? Any one of y'all could take that question.
I could try to take that. That's usually a question when it comes down to state colleges, universities, where state universities have in-state tuition for citizens who are attending that college from the state that they're actually residing in. Anyone else who is not living in that state typically pays out-of-state tuition. Again, it has to be for individuals who's residing in that state. Every state does have its own rules, but it is somebody who's residing in that state. I don't know if any one of the other presenters have anything else that they might be able to add to that.
I would just add that it really does change. Some states will say it's 6 months, some states will say it's a year, but I will also make a comment. I know that some states will also mention that the purpose of residence claim cannot be education, for example. So if you move to, say, Pennsylvania for the purpose of studying only, but you're still, technically speaking, residing somewhere else, then they usually do not consider that in-state unless if you actually like buy a house, like buy property in the state of Pennsylvania and reside there.
Thanks, Kevin and Peter. I think we have time for only 2 more questions. So the first question, I know we've covered this a bit during the presentation, but for self-employed guardians, what types of documents can they provide as evidence? If you could just give some examples from your experiences for self-employed guardians.
I would imagine that that's probably a bank statement that you're looking at, because even if you're self-employed, you're going to have some sort of an income, and you would probably have some sort of a tax information. But Kevin, I don't know if we're talking about FAFSA submission or identification of income on a CSS or an ISFAA form. But either way, I imagine that there are some documentation if you are self-employed.
Yeah, so the FAFSA does require that you're putting down accurate information regarding your income. For individuals who don't have a U.S. tax return, they should be using as much accurate information as possible. You should have some idea of what your income was from 2 years ago when you're filling out your FAFSA. If you are chosen for federal verification, or the institution also picks you for some additional documentation support what you're putting on your FAFSA, we might ask for additional documentation. As Peter mentioned, it could be a bank statement, it could be an income statement, it could be just some kind of official documentation that can confirm what your income was for the previous 2 years.
Thanks, Peter and Kevin. I'll move on quickly to the last question. I know participants are sending direct messages to me as well. However, we don't have time to take all those questions. We'll just take one last question, which is again about FAFSA. So for FAFSA, do we need to mention 10 colleges? And do we also need to mention the majors that they're taking up?
Very good question. No, you do not need to mention the majors on the FAFSA. Primarily what you're going to be doing is adding up to 10 schools that you'd like to receive the results of the FAFSA after you submit it. Again, adding a school to the FAFSA does not tie you to them in any way whatsoever. It doesn't mean you even have to apply to that college. It just means that the school will be receiving the results if and when you apply and are admitted. If a student wants to submit more than 10 schools, then what a student can do is, I mentioned earlier in my presentation that people can go ahead and make a correction to your FAFSA. A student can make another correction to their FAFSA by actually going back out to the FAFSA that's already been submitted and eliminating 1 or 2 or 3 of the schools that you've already indicated to receive the results of the FAFSA and adding new ones to it. This way you can ensure that the other schools could receive the results of the FAFSA as well. Hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Kevin. Peter, Pranati, do you want to quickly add anything else? Okay. Well, I think we'll have to end the session because we're almost at 7:30 p.m. India time. For participants who want to view the recording of this session, this will be available on our Education USA India YouTube channel. We have one last session which is left. This will be conducted next week and it'll be about interviews. So if you'd like to attend that, you can take a screenshot of the slide and register yourself. On behalf of Education USA, I'd like to give a special thanks to all our speakers, Pranati, Peter, and Kevin. Thank you so much for sparing your time and joining us. I know for Pranati, it's late evening, and for Peter and Kevin, it's early morning. So thank you so much for joining us. And I'm sure all the students have found your presentations very insightful. Some of you might even contact you directly through your universities. I'd like to give a quick shout out and thanks to my colleagues who are still working behind the scenes. Thank you so much for supporting. Thank you to all the participants for joining in. We wish you all the very best for your applications, and please feel free to get in touch with Education USA India team, the center that is closest to your location. So thank you so much and have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.